Manila. I'd like to acknowledge that we're situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation of the Alberta, Region 3. Land acknowledgement is part of reconciliation, but it is more than reading the script and pronouncing the tribes. It reflects a spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth. It is about earned relationship and acknowledge the Indigenous communities and their oral practices. We all are treaty people and hold responsibility to Treaty 7. As a settler myself and as an employee of a newcomer serving agency, I recognize the land where we live on, work, learn, and the land we love and struggle, raise our kids, and pass our traditions and cultures to them.
Okay, you done? Dina, thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And we are here at Zoom as well, live on Facebook, to commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in its second year since officially has been proclaimed in Canada. The day honors the children who never returned home and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. The public commemoration of the tragic and painful history and ongoing impacts on residential schools is a vital component of the reconciliation process. As Dina said well, land acknowledgement, it's also part of reconciliation, and it's more than just reading all the tribes. You may heard that today Canada will be illuminated in orange from 7 p.m. tonight to sunrise on October 1st tomorrow. And thank you all of you who wears orange shirt today. But what is more important for all of us is to learn about these dark, painful moments in Canadian history so they never repeat it, to learn about Indigenous survival and resilience. I would encourage you, explore the rich and diverse cultures, diverse voices, experiences, and stories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Whether you want to read, to listen, watch, or try, it's time to start your learning journey. But remember, it holds also an emotional label. We are honored to have today Tim Fox, who will share with us what we need to know and what we need to do for reconciliation. Some of you may know Tim as Vice President of Indigenous Relations with the Calgary Foundation. Tim is a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy from the Blood Kainai Reserve. He co-chairs the Circle on Philanthropy and Aboriginal Peoples in Canada Board of Directors and was named a top 40 under 40 for his efforts of incorporating reconciliation and decolonization. Tim, our Zoom floor and our Facebook floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for the invitation to spend some time with your group. If you've seen me in the last couple of weeks, I've prepared a little slide deck here that it might be a repeat for you. So just apologies for that. But what I have put together is just a snapshot of some messaging that I thought I would share in these spaces leading up to the significance of today. And yeah, so I'm just gonna kick it off by giving you and providing a deeper introduction of who I am. So I'll start off by saying, Oki itamik skinotoni, and good morning. Nistuni taniko naituisa gasam. As you heard in the introduction, my name is Tim Fox, and I'm a proud member of the Siksika at the Blackfoot Confederacy. My family comes from the Ekepokeks clan, and in English that translates to the Many Children's Clan. I'm also a father to an 11-year-old daughter, and I'm the son of residential school survivors. There you go. And I grew up on the Blood Reserve. And although we struggled at times, just due to impacts of intergenerational trauma. I'm also humbled, and I note a level of privilege I was afforded while being surrounded by my community, my family, culture, and traditions. Because of harmful historical legacies, policy, and practices that saw the removal of so many children that continues today, I understand how fortunate I was to be raised within my community, despite the challenges I faced. All of these factors that make me who I am contribute to the work I am involved in and tasked to support for the settler-created Calgary Foundation. And in my role, a big part of the mandate includes exploring and finding ways to mobilize the work of reconciliation, decolonization, and now racial equity from a systems change perspective and approach. I believe that gone are the days when systems, institutions, and society should expect Indigenous and racialized individuals to assimilate, adapt, or fit into the dominant culture. Those days are over. The time has come to challenge the current structure of these systems, institutions, and society overall. And I don't claim to be or consider myself an expert in this work. I'm just trying to do my best to learn and unlearn and grow and be less extractive when it comes to knowledge. In 2012, I was invited and welcomed to be a part of the design team that wrote the 4Rs framework on reconciliation. And through that process, I met my friend and colleague pictured here, and who I consider a traditional sister, Jessica Bolduc. And Jessica has once explained to me the notion of edgewalkers. Edgewalkers are people who leave the safety of the borders to reach out and expand our sense of community, bringing us back together in a different and more whole way. Because the changes we need won't happen where we feel safe. Edgewalkers are deeply interested in the potential of the future and have the hunger to contribute to a better world. And as I present here today, I can't help but feel a collective sense and desire from all of you to contribute to growth and change for the well-being of future generations, a better world. At the end of the day, our core values may be very aligned. We all want the best for future generations. We're just going about it in different ways. So within all of our difference, we have much more in common than we realize. Moving forward, we have...
Tim, sorry to interrupt you. We don't see the slides are moving. Do you see on your screen?
Oh.
Do you mind to reshare and select that screen?
Sorry. You don't see any of these slides?
We see just the front one. Decolonization and the cover slide.
Okay, here, I'll stop sharing. Oops. And I will try share it again.
Maybe you can go on the slides.
Do you see them now?
We see the first one. Again.
Okay, I don't know.
You have double screen there? Do you have two screens?
I have two screens, yeah.
So select the other screen.
Okay, hold on. I was sort of using the other screen.
Yeah,
to
now
off.
it's moving.
Hold on. Is it moving?
It was. Now it's still the first one.
Okay.
You cursor.
Necessarily need to use the slides.
Sorry, if you have it in presentation mode, it might be that we're seeing your screen as a presenter and not the other screen, because we're seeing the slide with all the other slides on the left, not the big one. So it might see that it's going into another screen.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's see here. Let me switch these around.
I do want to say though, Tim, that you are the presentation and we really enjoyed simply what you've said so far. So
Yeah.
I don't want to get too hung up on the technology.
Yeah, and I don't really need to share the slide. I can just share what I prepared.
Yeah.
You can scroll this main slide that you have.
How's that? Nothing?
Mm.
Okay. You know what? I'm not going to share. I'm just going to read. Sorry, guys. This is the challenge of technology. Okay. Now I just got to move stuff around. Okay. Apologies, but
We prefer to listen and see you.
okay, sounds good. All right, where was I? So in 2012, I was invited and welcomed to be part of the design team that wrote the 4 R's framework on reconciliation. And through that process, met my friend, colleague, and now traditional sister, Jessica Bolduc. Jessica once explained to me the notion of edgewalkers. Edgewalkers are people who leave the safety of the borders to reach out and expand our sense of community, bringing us back together in a different and more whole way. Because the changes we need won't happen where we feel safe. Edgewalkers are deeply interested in the potential of the future and have the hunger to contribute to a better world. And as I present to all of you today, I can't help but feel a collective sense and desire to contribute to growth and change for the well-being of future generations or a better world. And at the end of the day, our core values may be very, very aligned. We all want the best for future generations. We're just going about it in different ways. So within all our difference, we have much more in common than we realize. Moving forward, we have an incredible opportunity to participate and help lead efforts of truth, reconciliation, and healing through our work, education, and storytelling. In your roles, you're being called to help raise awareness about the importance of this work as part of your organizational vision and values. There is a harmful thought pattern about the Indigenous community that exists across the country. You may have been raised with this thought pattern. Cindy Blackstock refers to it as a colonial dichotomy of the savage and the civilized, the savage being the Indigenous community, and the civilized being non-Indigenous people. Personally, I never read the comments section on media or social media articles highlighting Indigenous issues. They are extremely harmful and hurtful, and I choose to prioritize my mental health and well-being over reading such comments. There's a media outlet in Sault Ste. Marie who recently took action against these very harmful ideologies that often surface in news articles they report on that cover Indigenous-related issues. And I wanted to share a point that they highlight when they made that decision. Quote, "It's just that some of you don't seem to have anything of value to say, and yet you keep saying it anyway, over and over again. At length and in hurtful and often hateful language. We have read your ignorant ramblings, your subtle but hurtful racism. We have moderated your thinly and not so thinly veiled threats of violence and cringed at your links to wackadoo conspiracy theories. The last month has not been pretty. And just the last 2 weeks, we have seen you resort to slurs of hurtful stereotypes over and over again. A story on the local tribute to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls prompted a stream of completely insensitive comments. At least one of you called for police to shoot peaceful protesters, and several of you suggested drivers run down the human beings holding Wet'suwet'en solidarity demonstrations. Another commenter suggested Canadians would be better off if we could live native free. Enough, end quote. James Dashuk is a writer of settler descent who wrote a book called Clearing the Plains. And he said, quote, "What that means is the foundation of Western society is based on, if not a lie, some pretty bad illegal actions on the part of the state. The foundation of our society is kind of rotten," end quote. A huge factor in efforts of systems change is when you are able to shift attitudes and beliefs. You're invited to elevate Indigenous people and communities in a positive way, further dismantling harmful beliefs about who we are and what we stand for. Join us in these edge-walking efforts for equality and belonging. It is through my connection with the Circle that I was able to meet my friends and colleagues, Michelle and Paisley Nahaney and Lloyd Attig of Decolonizing Practices. They introduced me to an impactful experience that takes a deep dive into concepts, vocabulary, and applications around decolonizing ideas, territorial acknowledgements, wealth, land possession, and more. In 2018, I had the privilege to meet Decolonizing Wealth's Edgar Villanueva, who taught and continues to motivate my sector to disrupt the existing systems of moving and controlling capital. He offers truth, reconciliation, and healing from the ails of colonization through education, radical reparative giving, and narrative change. Where I work, Calgary Foundation is experiencing some very significant transformation for reconciliation and now racial equity. But none of this could have been a realization without my involvement with those with lived experience and taking a deep dive into our organizational script, and then being compelled to facilitate the necessary change that has been needed for so many years to the infrastructure of how we operate as an organization. You can never let formal schooling interfere with your education, especially when it comes to the topic of systems change for reconciliation and equality. There's a notion of knowledge extraction versus knowledge mobilization. Since contact of early settlers and Europeans to this land, now known as North America, Indigenous people have always been extracted from. We've been extracted from in land, resources, women, and children, and that extraction continues today. There's a lot we must reconcile with. If you are accessing learning and sessions like this, simply to increase your level of understanding, you're being no less extractive than efforts before you. The difference is when you are compelled to mobilize elements you'll learn and unlearn on your individual journey. Take this information and then mobilize it into action within your spheres of influence related to your families, friends, community groups, and ultimately to your workplaces. I try to mobilize teachings from the folks I learn from while also inviting others into those spaces, because ultimately I'm not the only one responsible to move this work forward. And frankly, I wouldn't have that kind of influence to begin with. So it is with that notion that I involve all our stakeholders, from our board to staff to volunteers and donors, along this journey of transformation for change, so that we are not being extractive, but that we are, to our best effort, mobilizing meaningful change and transformation to the infrastructure of our current systems. One of my biggest teachers and motivations behind my efforts for change, equality, and belonging is my daughter, Charm. I'm helping to raise an Indigenous daughter who will become a woman one day. And in this contemporary time, that's a terrifying thought, because there are literally thousands upon thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country, and we have only begun to recover the remains of Indigenous children at residential school sites. This doesn't have to be a terrifying thought. When we speak to truth and harm experienced by Indigenous people, and when we challenge negative thought patterns so embedded within the fabric of society, we contribute to a shift in harmful attitudes and beliefs. This child of mine keeps me invested and involved in this work. I would be naive to think I'll see the significant change needed in a broad sense in my lifetime. That's not why I do this work. I do it with the hope that the needle is shifting, if not for me, then for the growth and population of Indigenous people coming after me. This work is generational. Transforming systems is generational. We need to challenge Western paradigm of thought and practice and go beyond the creation of 5 or 10-year strategic plans. I mean, do we really think that in those 5 or 10 years, we'll all of a sudden realize, oh, we're reconciled? It isn't that straightforward. This work needs to be weaved within the fabric of how we operate. Only then will we realize that we've made an effort to embed the notions of reconciliation within our systems. If you have little ones in your life, let them also motivate and guide you into different ways of knowing, being, and doing. A new kind of leadership is emerging in this young generation. They have no patience for the status quo, and we can all stand to learn a lot from the minds of this up-and-coming generation. The past few years have been extremely challenging for everyone. We've heard people refer to the lifestyle changes brought on by the impact of the pandemic as the new normal, and how we have had to transition to working, schooling from home, socially and physically distancing ourselves, experiencing shortages of food supplies and other household necessities, going through exponential loss of loved ones due to this disease and other social determinants of health. The stark reality for many Indigenous communities across North America is that this is not the new normal, and an experience that is not unprecedented, as we have been facing massive inequities, limited access, and denial of basic human rights since the arrival of settler nations. In my work, I've come to learn there's a lot of common belief without any common knowledge. From a Western perspective and a dominant narrative, we are socially and educationally conditioned. We are conditioned to act and react in a certain way. A friend of mine, Bina Patel, explains this as one acceptable way of doing life. And in this case, when we are presented with a complex issue, problem, or challenge, because of how we are conditioned, we immediately want to find a solution and fix the problem, make it better, but only if it is within the confines of the space that we are comfortable in, the status quo. The thought might be, so long as things don't have to fundamentally shift, I'm good with change. That's not what we're talking about. You know, that comfort space, that place that allows you to fully feel a sense of self without even realizing it. That's exactly the space and the place that Indigenous and racialized people are not, nor have we ever been. Why? Because we've been pushed, sometimes forcefully and through no fault of our own, to the margins of that space, to the edge, to allow the dominant culture to feel a sense of comfort within everyday life. I'm saying this metaphorically, but the dominant narrative, culture, and Eurocentric paradigm has become very accustomed to always having a seat at the table. Our history has been strategically designed and has helped to shape the current infrastructure of how our organizations and systems function. Even how we live in society has been shaped by this historical context and paradigm of thought. Our attitudes and our beliefs have been shaped by one perspective, one dominant, conditioned way of life. Edgar Villanueva says, or asks, how far are we willing to go to change things to a point that it's not in service of our own comfort? Decolonization. By definition, decolonization is about cultural, psychological, and economic freedom for Indigenous people with the goal of achieving Indigenous sovereignty. Colonialism is a historical and ongoing global project where settlers continue to occupy land, dictate social, political, and economic systems, and exploit Indigenous people and their resources. It is a global endeavor. That comes from the Global Solidarity and Actions website. Indigenization is a process of naturalizing Indigenous knowledge systems and making them evident to transform spaces, places, and hearts. It is important to understand there is diversity within Indigenous nations. Going back to my thought on the strategic design of our shared history, when I went to school, I learned about Indigenous people, but I didn't learn about my people, the Siksikates at the Beat, Blackfoot Confederacy. The history books did a good job of painting us with one brush and presenting us to the broader of society, generations before us, and our generation now, as one homogeneous group with one set of values, culture, and identity. That is not the case, as we are realizing with the rise of land acknowledgements across Mother Earth. As Nikki Sanchez notes in their TED Talk, decolonization is a responsibility for all Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. Indigenous people play a more prominent and unique role in the process of indigenization. It's important to understand that there is a distinction between decolonization and indigenization. Last year, the recovery of 215 children's remains at the Kamloops Residential School left us in a deep national sadness. This discovery has sparked growing efforts for healing and reparations that support the Truth and Reconciliation movement. And just this past summer, Pope Francis began a journey he called a Penitential Pilgrimage here in Canada, and more specifically to apologize for the Catholic Church's role in the forced assimilation efforts of Indigenous children at residential schools. That is a devastating reminder on the importance and need for systems change to the very institutions we are all a part of. I want to acknowledge the strength, resilience, and perseverance of all Indigenous people, especially those residential school survivors who continue to work tirelessly, sometimes being met with aggression and barriers from folks who uphold the denial of the dark legacy of this country and perpetuate the continued assimilation efforts and erasure of our people. Despite the challenges we face and recent findings on residential school sites, Indigenous people continue to show up to do this work. Every day we show up to walk that edge for change. As Jessica Bolduc shares, the invitation is for all to join us on that edge, to sit in with the truth and be compelled to amplify our efforts for decolonization. The motivation should not be to become an ally or a better ally. The motivation should come from the realization that severe genocide has occurred, and you're inspired to help right the wrongs of the past through change and action. It's the process and actions that indicate your ally status that is recognized and so needed by our communities. There is diversity within our nations, but there's also consistency in some beliefs. We share a common value that everyone has a seat within the circle for this change, and it is this change that we will all benefit from. In my work, I'm constantly reminding myself of values I was raised with by many people who had a hand in my upbringing. One of the most impactful teachers in my life has always been my late grandmother, Emma Many Feathers. Gima Bipitsin is a Blackfoot word that loosely translates to kindness and compassion for all things and all people. When I was a child, I have memories of many, many family gatherings hosted at my grandmother's house. She was the matriarch of our very large family. And I often reflect on many emotions and revisit all the sensations that were created within myself at those times. There was laughter, the smell of good food, medicines, or siksikibi, mint tea. I'm also privileged to have been given the opportunity to live and care for my grandmother and my grandfather. I would have to drive her all over as she completed her errands, and on those drives, I would hear story after story, often being told in Blackfoot, but she would also make sure to offer a little bit of translation along the way, because our languages were disrupted through our shared history. I rarely recall my grandmother being unkind, but always showing up each day with kindness and compassion. Simply by being who she was, she taught me how to live each day of life with Gima Bipitsin. Humility is another value and life lesson I received growing up, and I'm reminded of from time to time in this work. And I have my mother to thank for that. Growing up, I also remember the sounds of drumming and singing when I spent nights at my grandmother's house. Sometimes I would get up and join her in the kitchen as we sat by the window and watched my grandfather sing with his drum. And sometimes I would just lay still, taking in the beat and rhythm each morning. What never failed was waking up to him singing at sunrise towards the direction of the sun, or Natusi, as we refer to it. I did ask one time why he did this every morning, and I was told that my grandfather was using song and language to greet the sun every morning. It never failed. Each and every morning, this would take place. It's an act that still occurs today, where our belief is that each day we are given is a gift to us by the one who created us and all things, Istabat-Bio, creator. The Calgary Foundation offices are situated within the Canoff Center for Charitable Activities. The Canoff is a unique building that offers affordable office and meeting space to charitable and nonprofit organizations. Pioneered by my friend and colleague Daisy Giroux, strategy lead for the United Way Natusi Healing and Wellbeing Initiative, we identified a systemic barrier that exists within the Canoff as an institution. Since 2018, an advisory made up of Piikani elders, Reg and Rose Crowshoe, Indigenous and non-Indigenous tenants and stakeholders, have been working to impact change and allow Indigenous oral traditions to occur within the building, specifically when it comes to the practice of smudge. Only recently, after 5 years, have we made progress that allows us to show up to work while upholding and being our true authentic selves. Article 11 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People supports these efforts by stating, Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, and visual and performing arts and literature. There's a story that I want to share with you, if you bear with me for 1 second. And it is from a book written by Edgar Villanueva called Decolonizing Practices. And the story goes like this. There is a folk tale about a serpent that once upon a time was plaguing a village. The serpent had devoured many of the villagers, including children, and everyone lived in fear of its next attack. A flute player who was still among the living decided something must be done. He packed a bundle of food and a knife, and he went to the edge of the village and began playing his flute. As he expected, the music drew the serpent to him, and in one bite, the serpent swallowed the flute player. It was dark inside the serpent's stomach, but the flute player pulled out his knife and cut away a little of the serpent's stomach and ate it. Bit by bit, he cut away the serpent's flesh from the inside. This went on for some time until finally the flute player reached the serpent's heart. When he cut it out, the serpent died, and the flute player crawled out of the serpent and returned to the village, bringing along the serpent's heart to show everyone, so they would know they no longer had reason to be afraid. I see this story as a story about grappling with collective trauma. We have to enter into the darkness of it. It can't be dealt with from the outside. We have to go inside despite our resistance and allow ourselves to feel swallowed up and surrounded by it. It might seem like the pain will never end and there is no way out of it, but bit by bit, we come to the heart of the matter. The flute player had prepared himself for a prolonged reckoning. Some kinds of grappling for especially deep wounds are lifelong projects. If we do not reckon with it, however, if we carry around unresolved grief, we will spend our lives plagued by the serpent. When we finally get to the heart of the matter, we can emerge lighter and ready to build something new. So I'm just going to leave you with this. Always remember to be gracious and kind to yourselves and each other. Gimabibitsin. Carry a sense of humility in all that you do, and realize that you are partaking in an act to shift and transform through your experiences today and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, team. Thank you for sharing from your deep heart, your knowledge, your emotions, your connections with your ancestors, and forwarding and somehow including us in this Indigenous circle. And yeah, you are right, transformative work is generational. We will make our effort and we'll pass to the next generation. But because it's a long journey, it shouldn't be the reason to not doing anything or be just simply observant or discouraged to do anything because we cannot change in our life. We are part of this global human solidarity, and the responsibility lies on all of our shoulders to move forward reconciliation and to change the system and to allow everyone to be authentic self, especially when we work as service providers with people who are coming from all over the world, to spread the knowledge about Indigenous people who own this land and are still in this land, and we can share the wisdom with them and be thankful and blessed to be on the same land with them. I would encourage my colleague, if you have questions, I know you might be very busy today and have many more appointments and talks, but if we can have a couple of minutes to address several questions or some reflections, feel free, my dear colleagues, either to post on the chat or I see Rod already posted, or we can have 2 or 3 questions in the next 5 minutes. I see mostly thank you comments, and yeah, the story that you shared at the last was really thoughtful and deep. It will make us further to think and reflect.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you all as well for taking the time to really focus on the message and the significance about today, and hopefully you're more inspired and motivated to continue this conversation. I think from my perspective anyway, I just really try to invite people to continue the work even after significant, like today is a very significant day for our community. It's about healing. It's about the rest of Canada taking the responsibility to amplify this truth that we have known for so long, and to really make an effort to help us surface it in a way that contributes to some change, some really needed change when it comes to those negative attitudes and beliefs that we experience. But yeah, just thank you for taking the time. I know there's tons of local events as well happening throughout the day. I'm gonna be headed off to one of them to speak again, and then there's like a healing sort of gathering, powwow, traditional powwow at the Saddle Dome tonight if you're in Calgary. But yeah, I think there's a question from
From
Sherry.
Sharissa. Yeah, please, Sharissa, go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you, Tim. It's been my question at the back of my mind ever since. I don't know if it's gonna happen. Will there be a time where in the reserve will also be open to? I mean, just like us here, anywhere that you can go and you can just share. You can visit. You can visit the reserve at any time and say hi to each other. Is this part of the truth and reconciliation thing? I don't know if I'm asking the right question, but will there be a time that it's going to be open also for everyone to see, and yeah, that there will be no barriers, that it will not be called a reserve, but it will be called as part of Calgary, right? So I don't know if I asked the right question, but yeah, thank you. But thank you for sharing everything for today.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And I can't promise you I have an answer or the right answer. And frankly, when I think of, my community of the Blood Reserve, or when I think of other First Nations communities, I think what I would like to share in that regard is people have to realize that those areas of land are not very large, and those are the only areas of land that we have. And I think it connects a lot to these agreements that are still in place right now, like the treaty agreements. If a First Nation has signed a treaty with the federal government, or so it's a lot more complex, Sharissa. It's about land protection. It's about protecting what little we have. It's about environmental sustainability. I think a large percentage of the world's biodiversity is being protected by First Nations lands and resources. So I don't think our desire is to amalgamate into these larger settler created entities or created cities and municipalities. What we really want is some reparative work, and in some cases there's been developments on what was supposed to be treaty land that it's just has been a really unfair process. So instead of and then it's these are areas and these are communities that are very protected. But I mean, if you're invited to visit a community, then I would take that invitation. And there's a lot of people who have been invited. In the work that we do for Vibrant Communities Calgary, we were invited onto the Tsuut'ina Nation to spend a day with the Starlight family. So we all went out there. For a lot of those participants, that was the first time they ever visited a reserve. And it's not like this different world. I mean, it's no different from, a rural, I guess a rural community, I think the difference is that it's just mostly made up of our people. And of course we have significant sites in our communities where we have ceremonies and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think if you're ever invited to visit a reserve community, or if, I think that's one beautiful way to build and start strengthening relationships, is just to get to know the people from that land. Once you begin to form and strengthen those relationships, you'll likely be invited at some point to visit these reserves. And even during the summer months, there's celebrations in each community. They host a celebration, and these celebrations, these powwows, are open for everyone. So I wouldn't, when you see those kinds of invitations, I would try to find yourself in places and spaces where you might be the minority, and you'll soon find out that you're very welcomed in those places, in those spaces. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, in a way, although not really much, but
Sorry.
but thank you. You know, I pass by Glishan many times when I'm going to Brooks or to wherever, and then I see some houses there, and then I'm just curious, and then also just to be honest with you, I have tried connecting with some of the elders, because I am with the seniors programming, but I am never successful with that. So I really hope that sooner or later we'll be able to connect also with the elders from your community, and so we can also have some integration that's like what we are doing now with the immigrant seniors to the Canadian society. So yeah, that's my thought. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
thanks.
Thank you, Tim.
And I just want to speak to the thought about trying to reach out to community members. I think with this truth that we're trying to amplify, you have to do some sense making. So the information about residential schools, the information about the 60 Scoop, the information about these really dark, devastating things that have occurred through Canadian history are so accessible these days. You can find out about them through a simple Google search. What people lack is the sense making. And so, Sharissa, you shared that you were experiencing some challenges creating relationships and reaching out to communities. Well, you have to do some sense making. You have to understand that for us, these systems, these outside systems, have not been very kind to us. So you're going to experience levels of resistance from us. It doesn't mean we're being resistant to you personally, but it's about the system that you represent. And these systems have not been very kind to us. But I also want to encourage people not to look at resistance that you might feel, as a negative thing. Try to reframe that resistance as a positive thing. And I think resistance is just an invitation to have a deeper conversation. So don't stop your efforts, just realize it comes from somewhere. And everything that you're learning, you have to do some sense making behind, why is it I'm being challenged by this so much? It's because of our lived experience.
Great, that's so well said. And I also see the comment from Rod, who is coordinating the program of the Land of Dream with CCIS. I think we took this hand from Indigenous people to break the resistance and create more welcoming community. Rod, I don't want to put you under the light, but instead of typing, can you say a few sentences about the project and our great opportunities to work with Indigenous community?
Sure, thanks, Sanela. Yeah, we just, so back in 2019, we were able to activate some public land just on Stony Trail, and for a community farm project. And so we have three kind of pillars that we're focused on there. One is that we all come together and look to healing the land. Now, that land, we've learned in the last 4 years, is very hurt from the construction of the roads, and so there's a lot of healing of that land that we need to do. And I think as we come together as newcomers, as Indigenous, being able to contribute to the thriving of Mother Earth, I think also heals us. And so we have this great opportunity to kind of stand side by side. We work with Herman Manyguns from Pagani, He's our spiritual elder, but we have also got a partnership with Miskanawa and with Adrian of Mahugan Tales. And so I love what you're saying, Tim, in terms of building those relationships, because it does take time, and it takes a commitment from our side to be committed to that relationship. And I think we're starting to see that flourish. And so anyone from CCIS that wants to maybe continue to build those, we do have good relationships starting at the Land of Dreams, and yeah, would love to kind of share space. And if you do want to be part of something, we do have a teepee raising tomorrow. We've got a Blackfoot teepee that will go up tomorrow for our final fall harvest feast. So any CCIS staff, you're more than welcome to come. Activities will start the teepee raising is happening at 11. If you want to participate in that, activities at 2, and we're going to share a feast. Bring some food from your culture to share. We're having a feast at 5 to kind of wrap up our growing season. So we'd love to see any of you there. And Tim, you're more than welcome if you're not too exhausted after today's events.
Thank you for the invitation. I have to fly to Montreal tomorrow, so
Fair.
Okay. Great. I see we're already over the time that we projected, but again, thank you, everyone. It was this event was organized by community, the Sense of Belonging Committee with Calgary, with CCIS, and please listen and continue to follow our event. And today, take your time to attend another event online or in person. There are many that happens across the city. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you very much, team, for being with us today. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
thank you for having me.